That's a bit cosy, isn't it? You can have a little bit more space than that. Right, so this session is entitled The TNFD Framework in Practice. So here's our first acronym. TNFD stands for Taskforce on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And the TNFD framework is here to help organisations identify, manage and disclose their nature-related dependencies, risks, opportunities and impacts. All of those things, I'm sure you can see, are essential to a nature-positive economy. The TNFD has 733, maybe more, but 733 at the last count, which was COP30 in November, adopters, and 2 of them are in Scotland. One of the organisations, which is a TNFD adopter, is Fraser's organisation, Aberdeen. And the other, I'm really excited to say this, is Highlands Rewilding, the organisation that I work for in my day job. So we are the adopters. There are a number of other organisations kind of currently thinking about it, and Valerie's going to tell us a bit more about that. The Green Finance Institute, or GFI, our next acronym, hosts the TNFD Secretariat, and Valerie is going to explain the kind of basics and the journey of going through the framework to us. And I'm just going to ask Valerie to give us a slight bit of colour, please, about... are you mic'd up? No. I shall give you a handheld mic. So, yeah, give us a bit of colour about your breadth of green and blue finance career experiences.
Oh, sure. So I came to the GFI after doing some contracting with the Kana Collective, which is a consultancy with a focus on natural capital accounting, and we did a natural capital account for alligator leather producers in Louisiana who sell to European luxury brands. But before that, spent shy of 5 years at Pollination, a climate and nature investment advisory firm working on corporate nature risk assessment, nature strategy work, carbon market transactions, as well as some of our broader stakeholder engagement and policy advocacy around environmental markets, especially marine natural capital markets. And before that, come very much from an ENGO and philanthropy background.
Wow, thank you. Well, listen, you can go and get set up at the lectern whilst I get Fraser to tell us a bit about what you do at Aberdeen and your other relevant interests. And most importantly, how do you feel about the vowels back in the name?
Right. Is this on? Yeah. It is. That's a start. So, yeah, I've been at Aberdeen for 16 years now. The bulk of that, I've done real estate investment, so I come very much from the transactional investment side of the business. Prior to becoming a property investor, I did have a short and fairly unsuccessful academic career. I did a PhD in paleoecology, so reconstructing prehistoric environments, which is why I'm interested in recreating, if not prehistoric environments, then at least more pristine environments than we have today. So I've been working on the natural capital desk at Aberdeen now for almost 4 years, and I guess sort of in the context of TNFD, which we'll get to later, this is much more about creating nature-positive investments from scratch.
Fantastic introduction, thank you. So Valerie, over to you, and I want to see these slides, so I might go and sit back at my table rather than crick my neck. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So I'll start off by saying that, as asserted in the recent IPBES report, all businesses depend on nature. But despite their fundamental importance, nature-related issues historically have not been systematically assessed, integrated into enterprise risk management, or disclosed in a consistent or decision-useful manner. The inability to accurately integrate nature value into our economic and financial systems has driven unprecedented rates of global biodiversity loss. The TNFD was launched in 2021 to address this challenge. It aims to support a shift for global financial flows from nature negative outcomes to nature positive outcomes, aligned with the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework. The recommendations and guidance of the TNFD encourage and enable businesses and finance to assess, report, and act on nature-related dependencies, impacts, and then the resultant risks and opportunities. Transparent and consistent disclosure, in turn, is intended to enable financial institutions to identify exposure to nature-related risks, assess the sustainability of their portfolio companies' business models, compare performance across sectors and geographies, and allocate capital towards activities that reduce impacts and build ecosystem resilience. So the TNFD framework includes 14 recommended disclosures across 4 pillars. So these are governance of nature-related issues. Those will be the processes, controls, procedures to monitor nature-related issues. Strategy, the approach the organization uses to manage nature-related issues. Risks and impact management, how the organization identifies, assesses, and prioritizes nature-related issues. And then finally, metrics and targets, which are used in assessing performance, again, on nature-related issues. So for those who have familiarity with TCFD, I'm going to bring all the acronyms today. These 4 pillars will look quite familiar. And all 11 TCFD disclosures have also been brought over to TNFD, and 3 additional disclosures have been added. So these are engagement with IPLCs and local communities, interfaces with priority locations. Those will be material to the business as well as sensitive locations from a nature perspective. And then risk and impact management in both upstream and downstream value chains. So businesses will often find that the majority of the nature-related issues that are material for them are located in their supply chain rather than direct operations. For anyone who has obligations in the EU, I will reassure you that TNFD and ESRS also share these 4 pillars as well as all 14 disclosures. So we're not looking to pile on more reporting for reporting's sake. And then I think the most charming of the acronyms, the TNFD framework also includes guidance for conducting a LEAP assessment. This is a systemic process to locate where you have an interface with nature, evaluate your dependencies and impacts, assess the resultant risks and opportunities for the business, and then finally prepare to respond and report. Those 4 phases are broken down into 16 analytical components, and there's a series of questions that help a business step through this process. The ESRS again states that a business can conduct their required double materiality assessment using the LEAP approach, so there's another nice alignment there. And moving through the LEAP process helps a business understand their most material issues and how to prioritize what to get started on first. And I think this is a key attribute of the TNFD, that it's very much meant to be an iterative process, that businesses are encouraged to start with a narrow scope of what matters most and then build out over time. And then moving through this LEAP process, in turn, prepares the business for their TNFD disclosure. And businesses are getting started with TNFD for a variety of reasons. The number one reason that we hear is that investors see nature as a source of financial risk, and they're increasingly asking their portfolio companies for nature-related information as a result. The other is that organizations are getting ready for potential mandatory disclosures. So getting started, getting their senior leaders comfortable, building internal infrastructure and capacity before a mandatory obligation comes down the track. Businesses also recognize that the resilience of the enterprise depends on nature, often from previous work that they've done on climate. And there are also new commercial opportunities emerging from this understanding, and the TNFD process can help you identify them. So as Hannah flagged, over 730 organizations have now adopted the TNFD. They represent $22.4 trillion in assets under management, and 95 of these are within the UK. We are second only to Japan, but I will flag we're going to have another adopter announcement at COP17 this year, so there's still time to be number 1. Some of the largest businesses that are TNFD adopters are GSK, Anglo American, Reckitt, Tesco, Haleon, and Burberry. And then there are also 25 financial institutions within the UK that are TNFD adopters, including major players like Legal & General, Schroders, Federated Hermes, Fidelity International, and Standard Chartered. And this past autumn, we got a very exciting signal. The ISSB has started work on a nature-related standard. So this is significant because the UK government is expected to assess any ISSB standard for inclusion within the UK SRS. And indeed, it's just accepted S1 and S2 for voluntary use in the UK. And then processes are underway to incorporate these into listing rules through the Financial Conduct Authority, as well as potential disclosure obligations under the Companies Act. So that's a signal that this process could be forthcoming for nature within the UK. And that's also relevant globally because 37 jurisdictions are in various stages of adoption of ISSB. So we're really moving towards a world where mandatory disclosure on nature is a fact and a reality for businesses. And with all of these dynamics, companies and investors are increasingly recognizing the importance of nature. Indeed, a recent study found that deterioration of the environment could lead to a 6% loss to UK GDP by 2030. And as a result, investors are seeking more information from their investees. Investors are actively calling for nature-related issues to be addressed, managed, and disclosed. And global investors further are calling for greater corporate action on nature. So indeed, 77% of asset managers and asset owners surveyed by Responsible Investment Magazine want a dedicated nature standard based on TNFD. And further on the corporate side, 63% of TNFD survey respondents found that nature posed a just as or more significant financial risk for them compared to climate. And not to be all doom and gloom, there are increasing investment opportunities as well. They already exist for investors seeking to drive immediate and scalable nature impact. And further, investment in less harmful models of production may be the most meaningful or scalable form of interventions available. And I wanted to highlight that these can also be an engine of growth. Indeed, a Bloomberg NEF analysis found that there were 900 UK-domiciled nature tech businesses, and that this cohort grew their revenue by 25% between 2023 and 2024. So we see significant commercial benefits from action on nature. That can look like resource efficiency, enhanced supply chain resilience, reputational capital, so opportunities for distinguishing your brand amongst peers by your action on nature, minimizing legal liability risks associated with nature-related impacts through good governance and management, and then finally, improved access, as well as potentially lower cost to capital by demonstrating that your business has a handle on its nature-related risks. So through all of this, the TNFD framework really can be a powerful tool for market transformation and helping to align the economy with the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And I'm really excited to discuss this in more detail with Hannah and Fraser. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Valerie. That was a really clear introduction and exciting to hear about the LEAP framework. What would you say is the biggest shift that you're observing in how financial institutions talk about nature compared to, say, how they were talking about it 2 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that it's gone from being almost a nice-to-have ESG topic to now really a core financial risk and strategic issue on par with climate. And I think TNFD has kind of become the anchor for FIs. There are 179 adopters globally that are preparing to make reference to it. And we've seen this shift from sort of a why is this relevant to me, to moving into the absolute practical considerations of how do we incorporate this into policies, risk screening processes that we have, into new products that we may offer or services for our clients, and really building it closely into engagement with portfolio companies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Are there any Scottish headquartered finance institutions in the room today? Yeah, thank you. So go and have a chat to them at coffee time to see what their experience is. Thank you. Those guys from NatWest, I think. Fraser, as far as you're concerned, an organisation going through making these disclosures, what's been challenging about it? What's been the biggest opportunity of going through that?
Well, I'll start by saying that it's not something that I am directly involved with. So I am speaking at a bit of a remove here because, as explained at the beginning, I'm very much focused on setting up investments that are nature positive rather than reviewing the existing house. But I have spoken to colleagues whose job it is to do that. And I guess the point I wanted to make first was just to put in context with a business like Aberdeen's, how where the responsibilities kind of begin and end, etc. And just Aberdeen Group itself is a relatively low impact business because it really is just people, travel, a few buildings. Of course, it's our investments upon which we are acting on behalf of clients where the impacts are greatest. And we, since we've adopted TNFD, we've been trying to build a framework around how we measure and engage with that. And obviously there's a variety of sort of degrees of success and ability of how much influence you can have. So, for example, much of our business is legacy. These are mandates that we've had for years and years and years. And in many respects, the mandate itself is, if not fixed, it's quite difficult to sort of wheel it back and change how it operates. But of course, as time goes on, we're designing our own products that clearly we can have, as much influence as possible, obviously though, with recognizing where the market need is. Or there are RFPs that come out from investors that we can put ourselves forward for. And it is, as you said, Valerie, it's important to say that increasingly our clients want this kind of thing. So that's the main driver here, is that large institutional investors want to see TNFD adoption. They want to see these risks considered in what they're doing. And that, for us, and I think for everybody, is the most fundamental shift of the past few years, as you pointed out. And because that will see the biggest effects. And it will take time, but it will come through as long as they maintain these standards and we adopt them as well. So just to sort of give you a sense of how it works for us, there's multiple ways that our teams within investments, and we have a separate sustainable investment team that overlooks all the asset classes, equities, fixed income, real estate, infrastructure. And they set the agenda for how we use TNFD to sort of choose investments and influence what's happening. So there's desk-based attempts. We've got a proprietary house score for multiple aspects of, across the gamut, from climate change to water use, etc., which we do for all the investments. And then that's fed down into the executive side on each asset class. But then more proactively, we do nature-focused engagements with businesses that we invest in, particularly on the equity side. And that, as you might imagine, is quite a time-consuming thing to do with a limited number of people trying to focus on, I guess, the most impactful of our, the businesses that we invest in, or indeed those that we're most exposed to on behalf of our clients. But over time, we're hoping to get round them all to the point where there is a built-in sunken system of monitoring these things. And then beyond that, really it's a reporting exercise. It's reporting those exposures, ensuring that clients are aware how exposed they are to nature risk, and embedding the understanding of long-term value that nature poses to what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that figure that Valerie, you gave us of the deterioration of nature will cause a 6% loss to GDP, but is that by 2030? Yeah, I mean, so that's a kind of big challenge to an institutional investor. And I just wanted to clarify for everyone in the room, when you say our clients, you mean everybody in this room, don't you? It's us who are part of, policyholders, pension holders, and so on.
Yeah, pay your insurance, pay your pension. We invest it for you, so absolutely.
Okay, so for my pension, Fraser, what are you going to do about this 6% loss of GDP because of deterioration of nature?
So, well, I will refer you to our recently published sustainability report, which is in the public realm, and you will see for yourself there. And it's a great read. It's about 75 pages. You may want to skip ahead to the relevant sections. But it does detail what we are doing. I mean, I've obviously summarized it very quickly as to how it works internally. But we spell it out. These things have to be embedded because we recognize the long-term risk. And because the vast majority of our clients and our investments have a long-term basis, we're looking at generational investment. These things need to return over the long term. Nobody in our business is going to pretend that climate change and nature risk is not part of that. It's well recognised. The driest of organisations like Society of Actuaries, who generally don't get in a sweat about much, but they'll happily tell you that these risks are the risk to GDP over time is considerable. And if they're saying it, then everyone's got to take notice.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they're more representative of our clients than we are because they work for the insurers and the pension providers. So.
Yeah, thank you. Valerie, it seems like quite a complex thing to undertake, and complex things are easier for bigger organisations to undertake than smaller organisations. So I can certainly speak from Highlands Rewilding's perspective, that we've got no idea where to start. Now, very helpfully, you've said, don't worry. What we'll do is bring a number of organisations that are of similar type and size to you, and we'll work it out together. So thank you for doing that. But for anybody else in the room who is sort of going, okay, we've got the why, the how, though, we're now looking at this framework, it seems quite overwhelming. What are tips and tricks?
So my first tip will be, please reach out to us at GFI. We're funded by UK government to be a source of support to UK headquartered businesses who are getting started on this, and we really want to be available to help with first steps. And I think the other piece I would say is, again, just reiterating that it can seem very daunting and overwhelming when you're looking at the framework, but that you don't need to cover it all in your first year. And there are a wealth of tools on the GFI website and the TNFD website that give you a little bit of a handle on just how to get started with an initial high-level assessment. You can draw on some of the additional sector-focused guidance, and that'll give you a bit of a sense of what some of the average materiality ratings look like for impacts and dependencies and risks and opportunities for your sector. And that's a helpful prompt to take the step back and go like, ooh, gosh, you know what, we really should be looking at water, or you know what, where we're based, that's less of an issue, so we can go ahead and run with this deforestation consideration. And that you can pick the one piece that feels the most material and have a pretty narrow scope and get started there. And the other two pieces of advice, and honestly, insight we hear from businesses that have moved through this process, is that if you've done a similar piece of work on climate, you're actually going to surprise yourself with how much relevant data you've already collected, and that's a great place to start. Oh gosh, there go my papers. And I think the other piece is, as more and more reports come out from some of the larger businesses that have had more resource and larger sustainability teams, that's going to be a really useful resource for SMEs or smaller businesses, just to get a set of examples of what this can look like in the space. So really to underscore the importance of adoption and reporting, because it makes a meaningful difference in market. And then I think signing up to become an adopter only requires preparing to disclose against one of the disclosures within the next fiscal year, so you can get started on this journey and start to build capacity and comfort within your business gradually over time.
Brilliant, thank you. Fraser, there are a number of project developers in the audience today, and they're going to be thinking, well, if my rainforest restoration project or sustainable aquaculture project was going to be considered by Aberdeen seeking to pull a project like that into a fund, what would make them jump out from your viewpoint as an investable opportunity if you're looking through that TNFD lens?
So I guess that kind of takes us to the third strand, which is much more on what I'm trying to do, where it's nature positive investment from scratch, where it's not sort of looking to invest across all asset classes and ensure that nature is accounted for, but it's looking to create a genuine value chain around nature. So I suppose, I guess, high integrity in all these things is consistently raised. And what from personal perspective and experience that we're always looking for is that every consideration is made along the way for what you're actually trying to protect. So, if again, in my experience, which is particularly in Scotland, we have woodland creation and peatland restoration, then every aspect from all the ecosystem services that are embedded within a project like that are being considered and measured from the outset and rated, and that there is a plan, a robust plan around all those throughout the project, and then also that the human and social aspect is considered as well. And I think, if I'm honest, we kind of learned a lot of that the hard way. So we were quite quick to move on the natural capital opportunity, and we learned some lessons along the way, which we then evolved as our own strategy evolved, and it became very clear that in order to both attract investment and to be able to find the best projects and get the best outcomes, then you needed to be at the very top of the integrity curve, and you had to be very open to change your strategy to accommodate that as you went. So ultimately, any practitioner who would be looking to work with us needs to be as aligned with those standards as we are.
Okay. All right, I'm going to see whether anybody in the audience has any questions for Valerie or Fraser. Do you just want to put your hands up if you've got a question that you'd like to ask? Okay. And Sally's going to come to you with the roving mic. Peter, thank you.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks both. That was really interesting, really helpful for us. Sorry, Peter Phillips from Scottish Government. Valerie, it was absolutely fascinating to hear that intro. I've never heard someone working in TNFD do that, so it was really helpful for my own understanding. What it's made me think is that TNFD is, in essence, a kind of systematic assessment process, I think, more or less. And it reminded me that, I used to work in impact assessment myself, pre-government, and when a strategic environmental assessment came in from the European Commission in the early noughties, everyone was super excited about this mandatory assessment process that was going to really improve environmental policy making. I think performance and effectiveness of SEA over time hasn't lived up to that expectation. I'm just wondering if you see a similar risk with TNFD. If we've got this fantastic process, it's very systematic. At the moment, it's relying on voluntary adoption. Even if it is made mandatory, what can we do to ensure the results it yields is effective and actually changes decision-making and activity?
That was very snappy, Peter. Thank you.
That's great. I think exactly to your point, the biggest piece will be this transition to mandatory disclosure. I think that's going to be a step change where this becomes a necessary obligation. I think the other piece will just be this ongoing capacity building within organizations and just realization of nature-related opportunities. I think that signal that's increasingly starting to be sent that businesses who are leaders on these issues are realizing the benefits of leading on them, and that could create a really powerful signal for others to follow along. So I think it's kind of this perfect stream of an increased understanding and evidence of nature degradation, how that connects to economic stability, and then also the interrelationship of climate and nature. So just having that grounding of evidence, I think, puts us in a new place. And then getting more examples of how businesses who are aligning their business models with the transition and succeeding will be a really powerful signal. So I'm hoping all of those pieces moving along with mandatory disclosure will drive that impact.
And when you say mandatory disclosure, that would be disclosures that companies are having to make because the law is saying that they have to.
That's right. So the process that we're going to move through in the next couple of years will be, we'll have an exposure draft published from the ISSB in the autumn, and that'll be released for global consultation before a final standard is released. And then the way that gets metabolized into a mandatory obligation in the UK is moving through a consultation process like what we just saw the results from DBT on with the adoption of S1 and S2 into the UK SRS. I'm so sorry, I'm just acronyms. Sustainability Reporting Standard and Standard 1, Standard 2. And then the FCA is currently running a consultation around adoption into listing rules for companies. And then the Modernizing Corporate Reporting Initiative will have a determination around inclusion into an amendment under the Companies Act. And so we would sort of run through that same process with a nature-related standard that would result in a mandatory obligation for reporting on nature-related risks and opportunities.
Right. So Financial Conduct Authority is looking at, the FTSE 500 or those lists, and then deciding how those rules might apply to those lists.
Yeah, that's right.
Phew, got it. Brain nearly melted, though.
So sorry.
Thanks for that question, Peter. I think there was one over here. Thank you. Yeah. Just wait for the mic so we can all hear you. Thank you so much. And do introduce yourself.
Hi, I've got voice problems, but I'm Sasha Roberts from Nature Broking. And I just wondered about the figure that was given and the reason behind it, that there are, did you say there were 92 adoptees of TNFD in the UK, but only 2 in Scotland? Can you give a reason, can you think of a reason why that might be? And my second question is, on the back of Peter's question previously, is how long do you think it's going to take for it to become mandatory? Because, we can go through all these systems, but when?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. We might need to come back to Peter on that question. He's shaking his head. He's shaking his head. Valerie.
It's an interesting question, and I think the reasons for businesses getting started with adoption can vary significantly. I think it will depend on if they found this was material in an area they were already thinking about from their climate work previously, if they've been hearing about it from their investors. And so I think for me in my role at GFI, the biggest signal I'm getting is the importance of doing more market engagement in Scotland. It's part of why I'm so delighted to be here today, to continue kind of building that capacity and outreach to see if we can bring more businesses along and draw on some of the models that we have from the existing adopters. So hoping we can cut that time in half. And then in terms of the timeline to mandatory disclosure, it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So I think the point that is fixed in time is when we'll get the exposure draft from ISSB. So that won't be until October 2026. And even with that, we're starting to get a little bit of insight into the discussions of what shape that standard might take through the board papers that are incrementally being released from their staff. But it's not clear that that's going to look like an S3 or an amendment or an addition to S1, S2. But I think that global consultation process will, again, take some amount of time. So it may be 2-3 years before we're sort of through that entire process, but that is very subject to change depending on just how long each of those individual steps in the process take.
All right, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, Stuart in the middle, please. And then there's one there as well.
Hi there. I'm Stuart Charman from NatWest Group. This is a question really for Fraser, I guess. Interested in terms of kind of the natural capital kind of focused funds that you're obviously looking at, and new products and portfolios around that Aberdeen have been looking at. Obviously, we've got widely reported political headwinds coming from the US and a very litigious kind of area of the world. So as a fund manager, how do you approach that balancing act between long-term return versus fiduciary duty?
Yeah, I suppose I half expected a question like this. And it's definitely been a challenge in the past couple of years, particularly, I guess, mainly since Trump got in, but also just the political uncertainty leading up to that slowed things down. I suppose two things. Just going back to the point I made earlier about clients wanting to retain this kind of thing. So it's business as usual as far as that's concerned. But what has become more challenging is just the sort of speculative investment in nature in the broad sense. So whether that is carbon markets or other emerging codes, where, say, 3 or 4 years ago, I think we all felt a lot more comfortable to speculate on the future success of these things. There has been there's been a step back and a pause on that. There's less appetite for risk in that. But that isn't to say that we can't design other products that perhaps are de-risked in other ways. And a lot of that is down to growing demand signals at the back end, who are going to ultimately acquire and retire nature credits or carbon credits. And the growing engagement there, and something I definitely saw last year, despite the bad news, frankly, as far as the politics were concerned, is that suddenly people started making decisions that they weren't making before. It removed a degree of uncertainty. And a lot of actors decided, well, we've started on this path, so we need to decide precisely how we're going to take this forward. So I think the demand signals have improved a lot, and ultimately the market is becoming more sophisticated. But future products will be de-risked in line with that movement rather than being speculative.
Yeah, thank you. All right, final question. That hand there, thank you very much.
I'm Emily Johns from SSCN Transmission. One of the key points, Valerie, that you mentioned on TNFD is looking at the upstream value chain. For us, that's a lot of mining, commodities and materials companies. Do you feel that the engagement and uptake from mining, materials, commodities is enough through TNFD and other disclosures to enable their supply chains to act on TNFD and have meaningful outputs and contributions?
I think it will need to be complemented, and I think this will be how you're thinking about it as well, with circular economy approaches, where we're just thinking about how can we reduce our reliance on some of these resources in extractive sectors. So I think that's something that comes forward with the TNFD process as well, where you're going to be prompted to consider impacts on site with existing incumbent processes, but also where there are opportunities to transform a business model to reduce reliance on some of these high-risk touch points in the supply chain. And something maybe to flag is TNFD released its transition plan guidance in the autumn for how businesses can incorporate nature into existing net zero transition plans or create new transition plans that are nature focused. And one of the key prompts in that systematic framework is to assess the alignment of your overall business model with the transition and start to think through what's going to have to change for us to be able to have this business model, our operations, our services, our products continue to make sense in 2030, 2050, and what kinds of changes do we envision needing to implement in order to ensure that resilience over time. So I think it's one of those points where you sort of think about it both at multiple points within the value chain.
Fantastic. Thanks for that question, Emily. I'm really sorry we've not got time. We've got to keep the agenda moving forwards. But Valerie and Fraser are going to be here for coffee break and the rest of the day. So please ask your question with them in the break. But before we get to the break, we've got a very exciting session coming up where you're going to hear from some projects that have been preparing to be investment ready. So if I could just thank Valerie and Fraser. Thank you. Thank you so much. And invite Naomi and David up, please, together with, I can't remember everyone's name, Fernanda, William, Emily, and Renee. And what we're going to ask Naomi and David to do is host a session of quickfire introductions to projects which have received FRSA funding, so funding from the Facility for Investment Readiness. So over to Nao and David. Thank you.
I'll just let everyone get seated. But hi everyone, I'm David Cleland. I'm the FRSA funding manager, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland. FRSA, I always only use the acronym once. And I'm even more delighted that we'll be joined today by 4 of our projects, which showcase the length and breadth of activity that the programme has achieved so far. But before I hand over to the projects, just a quick intro about the programme itself. FRSA is a partnership programme led by Nature Scot and a partnership with the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Scottish Government. To date, we've supported 46 projects across all of Scotland over 3 rounds over the last 3 years, to the total of about £6.5 million. So quite a lot of investment. And what can FRSA do? Well, in support of the aims of the Natural Capital Framework and to help sort of shape and grow natural capital markets, FRSA really has 2 approaches. First is that we support a pipeline of investable projects, which some of the projects today will tell you about, and also we support market development, so development of market infrastructure, such as codes and standards that will help nature markets grow and thrive. So what do we expect of our projects? Well, first and foremost, that they're led by nature and community, that they're robust in their scientific methodologies, and also that they can bring in responsible investment in a sustainable way. That sounds easy when I say it as bullet points, but it's quite a big ask. But thankfully, you don't have to take my word for it, so I'll pass over to Naomi first, and then over to the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So I'm very conscious this is billed as the quick fire round. So I'm here representing Social Investment Scotland. We've been working with the Nature Scot team to support some of the FRSA projects. Our challenge to some of the projects to present here today was they've got a max of 2 minutes and they've got 1 slide. And my challenge to you as the audience is that given they're giving you a quick introduction to their projects, I challenge you to go and talk to them throughout the day and find out more. So they're the challenges I'm laying down. I'm only going to introduce by name because I know they're going to tell you about their projects themselves. And I've got a timer. I'm a bit bossy. So we're going to start. I'm going to sit at the front just to give you an indication, but I'm sure it's all going to be very slick and quick fire. So first of all, over to you, Fernanda.
Hi, Fernanda White. I've got some bullet points on the list because I'm not very good at being concise. I am part of the natural capital team at Bidwells, and I'm working with Achnacarry Estate to deliver this project with the very catchy title of Archaic Natural Capital Regenerative Investment in West Loch Arbour. The project is seeking to restore habitats around the Loch Archaic catchment and to use private investment to catalyse that. To date, we have completed baseline surveys and varying degrees of development of around 3,000 hectares of woodland expansion opportunities. The last of the baseline surveys came in last week, so we should have a pretty solid plan to go for submission with Scottish Forestry in the next few weeks. We've also got approximately 500 hectares of peatland restoration currently being validated under the Peatland Code, and we've signed heads of terms with a corporate end user for a forward purchase agreement for a proportion of the carbon units that will be generated from the woodland and the peatland schemes. So moving forwards, I should have said that we've actually got 2 of the forestry schemes already underway, moving forward with that. And we now need to secure the funding to deliver the remainder. So we, to date, FRSA funding and the estate's own investment have got us to the, have helped us to develop the project to this point. We now need to secure grant funding and actually secure a contract with that corporate end user to deliver the operations themselves. That's it.
Thank you, Fernanda, and well within time. Straight over to you, William.
Thank you. Can I stand up? Yeah. Is that all right? Thank you. All right. Well done, Fernanda. Put your hands up if you're from Murray. Okay. What do we have? 3. Early start. something very cool and interesting is happening on your doorstep, which is that 14 farmers who collectively farm 7,000 hectares in the Lake of Moray, that's north of Elgin, that total badasses, which you'll see by the rest of this 90 seconds, now probably 70, sorry, have come together around 3 shared objectives, and they are increase their business's financial resilience, increase their holdings' climate resilience, and make more space for nature. They decided that working together would help them achieve those aims with more impact and more quickly. So in 2003, we sat in a pickup with all of them over weeks. The farmers identified 250 hectares of area-based new habitat or improved habitat, over 60 hectares of new linear habitat, which is tech speak for hedges and tree avenues. You can see it all on that map up there. In 2004 and 2005, we had those baselined by terrestrial and freshwater specialist ecologists, and the designs refined. And that created this nature network. We now work with the Moray Council, I don't know if anyone from Moray Council is here, to incorporate this into the nature network as part of their biodiversity strategy. These plans will increase biodiversity by reducing fragmentation, improve water quality, support pollinators, and reduce soil loss. But this is where the rubber hits the road. It'll cost 6 million quid, not just to do, but to maintain over 30 years. I know I don't need to tell you guys how important that is, and that's before the farmers have made any reasonable profit margin, which they need to do. So we quantify the uplift, because we need to know what does this actually mean in numbers. That's the currency we trade in now, and we use the English metric, which many of you will be familiar with. That tells us that we're going to get over 1,000 biodiversity units, which is a lot. The Scottish metric is on its way. When that comes out, we will use that again to recalibrate this uplift. And the cluster is setting up an LLP, completely farmer-owned, to enable it to trade in ecosystem services of any kind. If biodiversity units aren't your thing, that's okay. We can be totally flexible in how we structure partnerships. If you've got an interest in Murray's nature and climate resilience, or you just want to support the work of the cluster, we'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Thank you, William. And next we have Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily Wardhaw. Welcome to the whistle-stop tour of the River Annan Restoration Project. The River Annan Restoration Project is a catchment-wide river restoration project. We were driven by to increase the biodiversity and climate resilience of the River Annan catchment in a sustainable way, in a way that can be replicated in a cost-effective way, basically. We have an established partnership with the local District Salmon Fishery Board. We have reinvigorated the River Annan Trust to act as the body for selling and trading of biodiversity credits and ecosystem services. We have 9 sites at the moment across the whole of the 800 kilometre squared river catchment. This portfolio of sites has been developed in partnership with our established partners, local community groups, local environmental charities. All of these have had a big part in the consultation process. We have over 100 hectares of riparian restoration, 5 kilometres of wetland and woodland planting so far. These 9 sites involve 4 pilot sites, which are shovel-ready, ready for investment, and a further 5 pipeline sites, which are still in the detailed design and development process. We are still in talks with current landowners across the catchment, further landowners across the catchment, to give us a bigger portfolio of sites, and these talks are going really positively. We have been currently doing a lot of community engagement and community involvement, going into schools with education projects and planning community events to sort of increase our community partnerships and get that knowledge really on the ground so they can understand what's going on in the river and how they can get involved. That is all I have to say. We do have a project website at the top there if you'd like to know more, and I'll be around all day. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. It's great to see that we've got these projects that are here and ready to be invested in as well. So hopefully you'll make those connections during the course of the day. And our last presenter today is Renee.
So I'm Renee Kirkfleet-Hermans. I work for the Irish and UK Peatland Programme, where I head up excuse me, where I head up the Peatland Code. So I am here today. Rochelle Kennedy is our biodiversity crediting manager, who actually has done all this work, but she couldn't be here. So we've got a project where we are quantifying our biodiversity uplift for both the Peatland Code and the Woodland Carbon Code. So it's a joint project between the two voluntary carbon standards. We are proposing to use the Operation Wallacea methodology, so a metric of baskets, a basket of metrics, where you have to measure actually your biodiversity in the field. We are proposing to use an explicit bundle. So we have looked at stacking or multi-credit bundles. The market is really nascent. There is no robust way or actually agreement in the market of how to do that differently. So therefore, at the moment, we're proposing to do an explicit bundle. That might change in the future. And for peatlands, we are also looking at a standalone biodiversity unit where for areas where they're currently not eligible for carbon. So where either we don't have the scientific evidence to use carbon, so for bog restoration, polluter or where your peat is too shallow to actually get carbon credits as well. We've got a webinar coming up next week, next Tuesday, the 24th. I should have put a QR code on there. I forgot, I'm sorry. But if you go on our socials, LinkedIn, you will find it. So either Peatland Code or Woodland Carbon Code LinkedIn, you will find the links to sign up for our webinar. And Rochelle will be a lot better at actually explaining this. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I said it was a quick fire round, and it really was. I'd just like to thank all of our 4 presenters, because actually it is a tough challenge, I think, sometimes explaining quite complex projects in 2 minutes with one slide. You all did brilliantly. And I think we're over to coffee. Hannah?
Thanks, Naomi. Thank you, everyone.